Video games age back over 50 years and have advanced beyond our initial imagination. So today we are going to revisit one of the defining moments of the 80s, more specifically the Sega dominant arcade era of video games, but to talk about a revolutionary game that was forgotten over time and would be entirely lost if it wasn't due to Sega's efforts to revive the game and its bumpy sequels and a unique one-of-a-kind remake in the most unforeseen circumstances that I've ever seen done before in gaming history. It starts way back to 1986 and we visit Sega arcades in Japan. The time where kids daily would meet up and go play the newest arcade games for the first time, titles that became to define Sega like Pac-Man and Sonic. One of them that initially stood out was Fantasy Zone, but we've got to go back further to a game called Scrambled that released in the early 80s, which was a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up game with simple gameplay. Enemies come from both sides of the screen as you scroll across when you move, and it's your job to shoot them all and stay alive. A much more advanced version of Galaga or Asteroids. Konami tried to beat themselves with a new game, Gladius, a much more detailed and rich sequel of Scramble that blew up in popularity. The concept was appealing to a young audience and had addictive gameplay. You are searching for a lost armada in unexplored galaxies and discover traces of lost civilizations, and you find new enemies along the way. Konami always made great games, but the difference is, Sega often took these great premises and concepts, but did it better. However, this was common at the time and going in both directions. When Namco made Pole Position, Sega decided to make Hang On. When Sega made Virtua Fighter, Namco made Tekken. The rivalry between Sega and Namco gave birth to several video games we have now, but Namco wasn't the only rival to Sega. There was also Konami. When Konami released Gladius and Sega saw it was popping off in arcades, they needed something to rival them with, except this time, they decided to make it look totally different. So that leads us to Fantasy Zone. Yoji Ishii was responsible for creating a title that could rival Konami's new smash hit. He decided to take on a new challenge and at the same time to make the first ever game using the iconic Sega 16 hardware, which if successful would blow Gladius and all other arcade games away. Everything about Fantasy Zone was to make the game stand out. The other games of the genre included dark themes in space, involving darker colours, futuristic, military, utopian art styles. However, Yuji knew what he wanted, and he set out to take this genre, redefine it with a bright coloured pastel themed art style, which immediately differs among the competition. On top of this, he went further and changed the generic sci-fi soundtracks to a funky Brazilian samba de amigo upbeat style to match the bright colours, and went even further into naming your hero Opa Opa, which is a phrase shouted often in Brazil as a form of excitement. Everything about this game was seeming bright, colourful, whimsical, and just funky. The game was nearly called Opa Opa before changing to Fantasy Zone. It received universal praise across Japan, becoming the second top grossing game upon release, and was Sega's #1 grossing game for 3 months in arcades. It helped give birth to the legacy of the Sega 16 boards, which is now one of Sega's most iconic and most used hardware systems of all time. In the Sega Master System port in 1988 received unanimous praise. The story of Fantasy Zone is simple, yet for the video games of the time, the story was more of a context to support the gameplay, to prop it up, rather than the focus of the game. However, the premising is still interesting enough. Many years ago, there was a Fantasy Zone beyond the universe. The hero Opa Opa has risen determinedly to protect the Fantasy Zone from the evil hands of the enemy. It is now Space Year 6216. The official currency between the planets was disturbed, and all planets fell into panic. From the official investigation of the Space Association, it was found that someone manipulated the men on aliens, made them steal foreign currency, and used it to build a huge fortress within the Fantasy Zone. In order to thwart the enemy plans, Opa Opa immediately heads for the Fantasy Zone. That is all the context we're given to support the story, but like I mentioned, the main focus was the addictive gameplay. Now, what does make Fantasy Zone's gameplay stand out? Contrary to Gladius, which you can only progress through scrolling one side of a screen, here you have complete control and freedom in your movement, giving you twice as much freedom as the competitors at the time. The entire game's map is a never-ending loop of screens. Another inspiration here is by none other than Pac-Man. In Pac-Man, you must collect all pellets before progressing to the next level. In Fantasy Zone, you must defeat all bases before a boss appears and you can progress to the next level. This, however, can be very complicated as you move and shoot incredibly slow and can quickly find yourself becoming overwhelmed. So to implement a form of progression whilst also solving this problem, we have power-ups, but a little different to the games of the time. In Gladius, you collect power-ups as the game progresses. However, here, you may only acquire power-ups from purchasing them from the store in each level. When defeating enemies, they drop coins that you must collect in order to upgrade Opa Opa's ability. Opa Opa uses two different attacks, the standard bullets and bombs, but he can also grow legs and run along the floor. It gives you no advantage, it's just cute as fuck. Upgrading abilities is key for survival. These abilities include temporary boosted shooting powers, like a 7-way shot, a laser, or a wide blade-like attack. There are 4 upgrades of speed, which are dubbed Big Wings, Jet Engine, Turbo Engine, and Rocket Engine, which becomes so excessively fast it's near uncontrollable, so anything past the Jet Engine is not optimal whatsoever for this game. Even the final bosses can easily be beaten with the Jet Engine. You can also upgrade into more bombs, more powerful bombs, and you can purchase more lives. Some of the abilities are time restricted and begin as soon as you leave the shop. Others can be equipped when pausing the game, like bombs, which are only limited in quantity. Only 1 engine, 1 bomb, and 1 weapon upgrade can be equipped at any time. Each purchase also increases the price next time you enter the store. This progression system is absolutely necessary and key, not only to eliminate any sense of repetitiveness, but also to give meaning to the game and encourage passive gameplay and progression in order to survive longer. The whole thing becomes meaningless if every level feels the same and nothing really changes. The biggest factor here, once you die, you lose all of your active upgrades. You must repurchase them in the store, so you must always make sure you have enough coins as backup in case you may lose a life. So this is where Fantasy Zone's gameplay becomes special, in its bosses, art and world themes. There are 8 stages and 8 boss fights in total that involve different mechanics and strategies to win. Something to note here, depending on which region and version you're playing, bosses' names and worlds may differ and some versions include extra bonus missions. While studying for the script of this video, I came across several contradicting and potentially incorrect reviews and summaries of the worlds and bosses, and was frankly difficult to understand where they found this information and what got them so confused. For the sake of simplicity, I will be focusing on the 3DS version of Fantasy Zone, which is the most definitive way to experience the game in 2025. Every world has a distinctive theme that makes them stand out and become more memorable. To reinforce this, each level also has a different boss, theme, music, and enemies, all which come together to create this timeless classic. Plaleaf is the player's first introduction to the game and doesn't waste any opportunity to express the unique vibe the game proceeds to give. Its whimsical feel is fueled by its bright, lush, green and colourful map as it eases players into the addictive gameplay and patterns of defeating enemies, collecting coins, surviving and upgrading, a great entrance to this great game. Here you begin to learn the attack and movement patterns of certain enemies and familiarise yourself with them, as you aim to defeat all pink-winged bases that deploy enemies from inside, as well as many woodland and buggish themed enemies. Its bright colours work extremely well with the funky party music which brings the map's vibe all together. Once you defeat all the enemies, you approach the first boss of the game, which is a tree-like monster called Stunpello that shoots projectile leaves towards you. Here, only Opa moves while the screen stays stationary. You must dodge all incoming projectiles whilst also shooting in the boss's mouth at the same time he's shooting at you. It's a very simple strategy and a great easy introduction to the game. World 2, Tabas, is in contrast to Plalith's green and blue colour palette. Here in Tabas, we have an orange/pink mix with rocky, ominous terrains, and you can instantly differ this world to the previous. You'll notice some familiar enemies here as you're still easing into the game's flow, but you'll notice a few new foes, including the new orange bases who have hands and sit on some rocky terrain. This game's second boss, Valanda, is a yellow orb that surrounds itself with 8 purple metal spheres. Underneath those spheres are 8 smaller spheres that change colour, signifying the boss's health. Valanda is also very angry. The strategy here is simple: you survive. Valanda will shoot several projectiles off screen into the air, and it's the player's job to find gaps to survive these completely random attacks, all whilst finding small opportunities to bite away at his health, hit all the green spheres, and then turn them red to defeat him. We go eerier here in World 3 in Ladun, with a brighter themed nightmarish starry environment, where the ground is covered in bulbous plant-like structures and a star/space-like objects surround the horizon. Here you'll notice as we head further into space, we come across newer enemies such as flying ships as well as a few familiar enemies, but the pattern here is how every level has a new base. Here is the new yellow UFO style bases coated in blue spikes. Reaching the end of this world, the game's third boss, Cobra Beach, is a flying disc with a wing at the top and bottom. This boss also has 9 cannons pointing towards you and shoots them at you rapidly throughout the whole boss fight. With a well-timed heavy bomb, you can eliminate all cannons quickly, which is key as the cannons will start following you and become increasingly difficult to avoid. Defeat the cannons to defeat the boss. In World 4, Dolomika, there is a small change in difficulty and theme as we venture further into space to a blue crater-like environment that consists of faraway moons and a strange atmosphere. Across the surface is a drilling plant, as some of the enemies are now small drills, and newer robotic foes appear too with new attack patterns. The bases are much larger drills poking out of the ground to emphasize this planet's theme. The fourth boss is Krabunga. He is a large blue orb that resembles a face, who also has large, long, clawed arms that shoot projectiles erratically whilst he launches them in no specific pattern towards you. The objective is simple, and at this point you've got the basic grasp of the game, and survive and find opportunities to attack. Each arm has 11 weak points you must destroy whilst dodging projectiles and his arm attacks. Damaging each weak point a few times will make it discoloured, and once it turns red, you can move to the next weak point. Once all of them turn red, you've won. Another vast change in the fifth world, Polaria, which is an icy snow-covered world with a blue, pink and white blend aesthetic. The sky is soft and starry, whilst the environment feels almost angelic, like we have ascended deep into space. The horizon is filled with white snowy mountains, and the environment has scattered pastel pink branches. Hanging off them are this world's bases, which in my opinion resemble frosted beehives that deploy more common enemies and new enemies. To further emphasize this snowy world's theme, the fifth boss, they are an army of snowmen in formation and an increase in size as you progress further into the fight. The first line of snowmen are easy to hit and only take a few hits to kill while they fire snowballs at you. The next line of 4 snowmen are much larger, acquiring the same strategy except now have more health and fire larger snowballs. Next up is 2 snowmen, and we rinse and repeat the strategy until we reach the final snowman. Although he takes more hits to defeat, his attacks are far easier to avoid. Just stay focused and you'll pass. Next up is a battle in the skies of planet Mockstar with an orange, white and pink palette feeling familiar to World 2 Tabas. The pink horizon and environment is filled with clouds with orange sphered bases resting on their own individual clouds, and far away in the distance lies nearby planets. This planet's boss is Winklone, which is a small white eye that guards itself with several harmful rotating blue spheres for protection. The spheres here act as barriers, touching them instantly kills Opa Opa, so as they spin across the map, you must travel inside and survive while periodically shooting at the eye in its core. This is the first traversal boss fight in the game, as the key here is survival and movement. Opportunities to attack Wing-Clone's eye are very slim, so patience is key. We near the end of the game in World 7, Precarious, which is a lush water-dominant planet, with its face spread across a deep blue and pastel green palette, with few deeper colours to identify plants, other greenery and detailed environments. It's got long green islands and mountains filled with water, whilst the bases are propeller flying blue pods to match this planet's art theme. I particularly like how one of the final worlds resembles the first world, with its buggish and greenery theme. This world's boss is a large wooden artifact that resembles a monster's face. He explodes himself into several smaller pieces of himself and expands across the screen. You must traverse through the gaps he has made and avoid his attack. Once he forms back into his larger self, you must quickly attack and prepare for his next explosion. Repeat this process until he is defeated. World 8 comprises of no regular enemies. Instead, the game throws you into the deep end and makes you fight every single boss you fought the entire game back to back. It's placed inside what appears to be a larger spaceship with circuit boards and large engines around the environment. Fortunately, when you defeat a boss and you die, that boss also stays dead, and the shop instantly appears for you to repurchase abilities. The key here is to remember all attack patterns from each of the previous bosses and just practice. Once defeating all enemies, the real final boss approaches and appears as a large robotic creature that will send out 6 snake-like creatures that will chase you around, leaving a trail that cannot be touched. The job here is to defeat them all. However, after each one you kill, they become more erratic, they become faster, and they have tankier health, whilst they also start targeting your specific movements, giving you extremely little time to respond. Once defeating this enemy, he moves forward, and it is revealed this large robotic creature is in fact Opa Opa's father. Opa Opa has now destroyed the invading army and restored peace to the fantasy zone. However, he has mixed emotions because his long-lost father was the chief of the enemy forces. One burning question that will remain with him until his dying days: was my victory really worth the price I had to pay? A game as widely popular and loved is bound to send ripples in the industry and leave its mark, which it did through several ports and a legacy which I've never seen Sega or any publishers go through such lengths, but I will discuss that further in the next video regarding Fantasy Zone 2. The game naturally had ports across consoles at the time. The Master System version closely resembled the arcade original, without the map radar feature, and 2 bosses were replaced. Japan was given 2 versions across home consoles for the Famicom and NES, released in 1987, only 1 year later by Sunsoft. Whereas the American version was a bit rougher, it released 3 years after the arcade original in 1989 and was published unlicensed by Tengen. Since here, the next release was in the Sega Ages series collection for the Sega Saturn in 1997, 11 years after original release. Fantasy Zone was later re-released as an enhanced remake for the PS2 in 2003 in the Sega Ages series, although closely resembling the original, including the important arcade sound effects. This version instead uses 3D polygons rather than sprites across the entire game, and adds new stages, including bonus levels in first person under the viewpoint of Opa Opa, as he tries to collect coins from the bosses he defeats. This mode is very similar to another Sega classic, Space Harrier. In North America and Europe, this was released under the Sega Classics collection. This remake for the PS2 was also compiled with other Fantasy Zone games, including the never-before-seen one-of-a-kind remake of Fantasy Zone 2 that we will discuss another time. and it includes other mainline and spin-off games too. The original arcade version is unlockable in Sonic's Ultimate Genesis Collection for PS3 and Xbox 360 in 2009. A 3D port was also made for Nintendo 3DS in 2014 titled 3D Fantasy Zone Opa Opa Bro. This is now the most definitive experience of Fantasy Zone, and is the version I am playing while writing this video. The new features of a 3DS port involve stereoscopic 3D visuals, adjustable difficulty settings, the ability to save the game, switch between Japanese and USA versions because, well, why not? A stage select feature which unlocks with natural progression, and a new mode that features Oopa Oopa, who is Opa Opa's little brother. Also, the two bosses that were exclusive to the Master System version can also be unveiled here. In October 2022, a Sega Genesis port was made for the Sega Genesis Mini Microconsole that released in 2019. The only change in this version was an optional Super Easy mode. Fantasy Zone left its mark on the arcade industry, however, it died alongside it. Only through Sega's attempts it remained alive in the most unforeseen circumstances. Sega loves to stroke themselves on the back and loves to include references to their older series and other games. Fantasy Zone has had too many ports and regions to count, official and unofficial, and included in several Sega Collection bundles, but I would rather focus on the lesser known references and attempts to remind fans of this beloved game in the most random places. I'll start with the entire reason I decided to make this video. I was casually playing Sonic Superstars, and as I was approaching the end of the game, something felt familiar. After a few seconds, I realised I am playing a Sonic parody of Fantasy Zone 1. The entire first two worlds present under a Sonic skin included bosses Stumpello and Valandra. I was so shocked playing this and had a huge serotonin boost so large this video now exists. I was a casual fan of Fantasy Zone before this, but such a niche, unique reference really showed me how much I cherished the game. Next up is through another Sonic game, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing. Of course, this game includes, you guessed it, Sonic and Sega All-Stars, but what stands out here is that Opa Opa appears despite not being popular for almost 2 decades before this game was released. This entire game is a walking talking Sega reference, and it's amazing. But back to Opa Opa, whilst everyone is driving cars, Opa Opa accelerates by running with his cute stubby legs and extends into full speed by flying through the map. Yakuza 0 is set in the 80s in a hyper-realistic Japanese city and includes Sega arcades across the entire series. In here, we can play several great Sega classics including the original arcade version of Fantasy Zone 1 in a Sega arcade. It is identical in every way to the original arcade release, except for the addition of a rapid fire button and an optional aspect ratio. Fantasy Zone also appears in nearly every single Yakuza title since the release of Yakuza 0, including the newest Like a Dragon games, and is even a collectible figure you can collect in Yakuza using the claw machines within the Sega arcades. Surprisingly, Opa Opa has appeared in several other Sega titles as a collectible figure or a random cameo. Some of this list is including Shenmue, Shenmue 2, Sonic Runners, Phantasy Star Online, Alex Kidd in Miracle World DX, Planet Harriers, Segagaga, Sega Splash Golf, Project X Zone, Project X Zone 2, Zillion, Quartet, Flashpoint, Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing Transformed. I'll attach the full fandom list in the description if you choose to explore these cameos and references yourself. It's honestly surprising. Ultimately, it's very clear that Sega is proud of their history and does not pass up any chance to include cameos and references to their older works. It's nice to see so many titles come together in these smaller ways. Unfortunately, I'm just a few years too young to have experienced Sega's prime arcade days, but nevertheless, I can still sit here writing about my respect for Fantasy Zone, for Sega, and appreciate the passion that's put into these old arcade games. There are some of you out there that can appreciate this game or this video on a much deeper level, perhaps even a nostalgic level. I think Sega will continue this trend of Fantasy Zone cameos in the future, and it's very unlikely we will be seeing a new game or even a new port for a very long time, or possibly ever. It would be great to have the entire series put onto a collection for modern consoles. It would also be so cool to finally get an official release for the cancelled Fantasy Zone / Space Harrier crossover game, which are canonically set in the same universe. Unfortunately, for unknown reasons, this cancelled game is a rarity even in Japan, but I remain hopeful for Fantasy Zone's future.